Hello, I'm Mark Espinoza with Walmart, coming to you today from Bentonville, Arkansas. It's an honor to spend a few moments with you all before the next NIC session, the work of culture and narrative change, a practitioner's view. I'm looking forward to hearing the panelists speak about building inclusion and belonging and connecting across lines of difference. Creating opportunities where everyone feels safe and valued is vitally important to Walmart. With 90% of Americans living within 10 miles of a Walmart store, we're literally in the business of welcoming. And inclusion is a cornerstone of our company values. In many ways, Walmart reflects the best this country has to offer. People from all walks of life going about the business of taking care of family and daily responsibilities, living their lives and chasing their dreams. Walmart is proud to be woven into the American fabric as a place for all people. Responding to the COVID pandemic and tragic events over the past few years has been a test of resilience. Walmart associates have gone above and beyond the call of duty in serving our customers during these unprecedented times. In El Paso, Texas, in South Haven, Mississippi, in Chicago, in Red Bluff, California, and many other places. It is not lost on us that events such as these are a product of frustration, born out of an all or nothing mindset that appears to be increasingly prevalent in the U.S. and is not reserved for political affiliation or identity labels. Walmart is committed to being part of the solution. We believe we are stronger as a company and as a country when people are included, heard, and empowered. As we strive to be the most trusted retailer, we're constantly evolving how we do things to make life easier for our associates and customers and serving the needs of our communities. We're developing strategies and investing resources, both internally and externally, to nurture mutual respect and cultivate empathy. We make efforts to prioritize the challenges most relevant to our customers, associates, suppliers, people who work in supply chains, and live in the communities we serve. Through our jobs, sourcing, relationships, and capabilities, we aim to create economic opportunity, advance equity, and help strengthen social cohesion. We're helping to advance the genuine attitude and behaviors changes our country needs to move towards a more united future. Walmart is proud to partner in the work of many groups who are at this conference. We share our vision for cohesive and thriving communities where everyone is welcome. It's important work and a privilege to be with you on this journey. Thank you.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Wendy Feliz, and I direct the Center for Inclusion and Belonging at the American Immigration Council. I'm so excited to sit on a panel and help moderate a discussion with 4 people who are bending culture and complicating narratives every day. Their work is so critical as immigration has become a front in America's culture wars. Good federal policy has been elusive for many years as our national leaders use the issue to divide us. Sadly, many in America have taken the bait, turned inward, and become stuck in zero-sum thinking, believing that if immigrants get something, they somehow lose something. This is an incorrect and destructive storyline, and it has to change. However, I believe you can't fight a culture war with rational arguments alone. I believe it takes intentional work, emotional work, face-to-face work at the local and individual level to build empathy and mutual respect across groups. If culture is the air we breathe, we have been inhaling hate-filled CO2 for years now, and we need millions of trees to transform that poison back into healthy oxygen. That is what our panelists do. They are filtering the air so we can breathe hope, understanding, and empathy. They use food, art, dialogue, and media to reach people and give them a new understanding of other people's lived experiences. They are building spaces and programs that give people the gift of full belonging in their community. And they are connecting us so that we can know each other, see each other, and hear each other. This is not easy work. It can be uncomfortable, provocative, and triggering for some. It takes courage to confront people's biases, racism, fears, and pain, and not lose them in the process. But the leaders you will hear from today understand that, and they are rewriting the American story of who counts, who matters, and who belongs. I am excited for you to hear from them today. I'll introduce the panel and then they'll give their presentations, and then we'll follow that with a discussion. First up, we will have Tunde Wey. He is a New Orleans-based activist, writer, artist, and chef who likes to serve up a side of political performance art with his food. His culture-bending strategies highlight inequality in America, and he will leave you hungry for more. Daniela Peterson is the Chattanooga-based Senior Advisor for Community Strategies at the Trust for Public Land. She is an expert in creative placemaking and specializes in integrating community perspectives into public projects. Philippa Hughes is a DC-based social sculptor and cultural strategist and the founder of Looking for America. She creates art-fueled projects that connect people who would not normally meet through meaningful, humanizing dialogue. Mohammed Naeem is the Queens-based Senior Manager for Strategies and Partnerships at the Center for Inclusion and Belonging at the American Immigration Council, my partner. This is where he builds and manages campaigns and interventions that provide people in America with unifying experiences that reinforce their sense of connection, community, and shared destiny. Now, without further ado, I would love to hand it over to Tunde. Tunde, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me on this. This is exciting to share my work. I think we're going to show a video, but before we do, I just want to set up what that video is. So generally, my work has been to use food as a way to instigate certain scenarios that reflect the questions that I'm grappling with. So I think folks know me for like hosting these dinners that have a conversational component to them. And these conversations are about, questioning power. So questioning racial power, economic power, to a certain extent, gender power, and then, citizenship power. And the ideological crux of these dinners are, I want to shift the responsibility or the burden of proof, the burden of convincing, the burden of explaining away from the people who are usually saddled with that, away from the folks whose work and lives and experiences have been marginalized, to the folks who are benefiting from the system that is uneven. And I can give a couple of examples of my work. I think the one that unfortunately folks know me for is a dinner series that I did where I charged different people different prices based on their racial privilege. Another project that I did was to sell hot chicken for exorbitant sums in Nashville and take that money to invest it in community land trusts so that Black folks in those communities could have some access to affordable housing. A project that I did, which is personal to me, personal in the sense that I am an immigrant. I moved here when I was 16. I am 38 now. I moved here from Lagos, and I spent 20 years in the United States without being able to go back because I was undocumented for half that time, and I spent the last 5 years trying to regularize my status, and eventually I was able to, and I finally went home for the first time about a month ago. So the project that I'm talking about is called Love Will Trump, and it's a dinner series, and I hosted two of these, one in Pittsburgh and the second in DC, where basically I paired immigrants with US citizens on a blind first date, and the idea was that maybe they find love and maybe they get married, and maybe whatever happens after that again shifts the burden of responsibility onto the folks who have the privilege, and those folks are US citizens. I think that for me, my work has always been about these instigations and escalating them. So escalating them to the point of absurdity, because the questions that I'm contending with, the questions of why some folks have and some folks don't, is absurd in itself. And so I'm interested in raising those stakes, But the interesting thing is that the reaction to my work, so say, for example, the Love Will Trump dinners, like the reaction to that work as absurd is interesting because that work is mirrored in contemporary culture. So there are all these TV shows that, that use the immigrant experience to contribute to American entertainment. So you have 90 Day Fiance or some other of these different sort of shows, and you see continuously that immigrants, Black folks, brown folks, indigenous folks, folks again whose experiences have been marginalized are source of consumption for mainstream culture, and that seems to be where the validation happens. So I'm hoping to, and I try to, in the work that I do, turn that on its head and use our experience and the more specific mine as sort of like a critical bludgeoning tool, where I am asking folks to think beyond consumption and investigate those tendencies. So, which brings us or me to my current project, which is a docuseries across 4 cities, 2 continents. So we start in Detroit, where I used to live, New Orleans, where I currently live, El Paso, where I was detained as an immigrant at the detention center, and we end in Lagos, my home. And we basically talk about the what it means to be somebody, or what it means to be a community who has been marginalized. And we talk about the sort of like the global socio-economic system that we are all part of, even at the very local level, how we're locked in to this system, and how the language that we use to describe our marginalization is that we haven't been properly integrated into the system, right? So if we talk about Black folks or brown folks or indigenous folks in the United States, or immigrants here, we talk about how there aren't opportunities, or there are all these barriers. But the truth is that the integration is complete, in that we are integrated to the extent that we are needed and necessary to produce a certain kind of product that services the economic system, that services the racial and jingoist perspective. So it's understanding that we are in fact part of the global racist capitalist system, and that our integration is exactly where it should be, based on how we are extracted and how we are imposed upon by the larger system. So I think that the best way that I can tell these stories is through film. I've done it in small rooms, I've done it in my writing, but there's a limit, to the extent that people can interact with the ideas. So I think like film, television specifically, as a way to inform narrative change is important. I feel like this is a battle, it is a war, and you need different tools, and one of the tools that I think are necessary is film. So with that, maybe we can just play a bit of the trailer.
My name is Tunde. I'm a cook and a writer. I left Nigeria at 16 years old and moved to Detroit, where I lived for 15 years. An opportunity to open up my own restaurant brought me to New Orleans 5 years ago. New Orleans, the most African city in America, as I have heard some folks describe it, is where my political education began. How do you challenge that when it's like good people who are doing shit that is destructive?
Having difficult conversations with people and asking questions like we're doing now.
Let's talk about Black people. What do you think about reparations?
I use my cooking to interrogate disparity. Who here considers themselves a gentrifier? Who is willing to be a little bit uncomfortable, to take an extra bus, to pay extra gas money, extra taxes, so that our communities aren't gentrified? I'm hosting a new kind of travel food show where I'll be talking about the social and political implications of food. The first episode happens in New Orleans, a city where restaurants have become a tool of gentrification and Black chefs struggle for recognition and reward. New Orleans is America's greatest food city, and Black folks are responsible for that greatness.
There are very few black chefs that recognize in the city.
It makes me angry because this is like black people shit. The reason why people come here,
It's for black people.
yeah, and then like you don't want to give black people, that's like crazy. Hit this.
Oh no, indeed.
The twin forces of gentrification and whitewashing conspire intentionally, even if subconsciously, to keep those very black folks whose labor and imagination built this culinary culture from enjoying its considerable spoils.
Chef John Besh, he has 12 restaurants, not one black executive chef.
I didn't really worked in restaurants where the new chick came in and now all of a sudden she the sous chef and we sitting up there like, homegirl just was talking about how she just went to school. She just graduated school 2 years ago. With me being who I am, if I was a little white girl, I'd probably be, driving a Rolls Royce somewhere.
White privilege is an obscene thing. It takes everything quietly until there's only silence left. Then it takes that too and fills it with noise. If we say we want equity, we must confront at the source this cycle of race and class dispossession.
I don't know exactly what I can do. For me, it concludes logically when there's a transfer of resources.
Now is the time to give something up completely and honestly and permanently.
The acknowledgement of privilege has to be followed through to its logical conclusion.
Return what you took to the place where it was to the people to whom it belongs.
What do you see as those ideal actions?
Give me your house.
Give you your house.
Give me your house. Sign it over right now.
Strip yourself of the benefits willingly with grace. And on the other side is community.
Would you leave your job so that a black writer will come in your stead?
Or have it stripped away unwillingly. And on that other side is shame.
You can't talk about equity and say you're for equity and not live it out. Where do you guys shop? Where do you guys eat? How are you living?
This is the moral of the story. And this story is only for the people who claim they want equity.
How do you personally deal with that sense of dissonance? Do you have a sense of dissonance?
New Orleans is America's greatest food city, and black folks are responsible for that greatness.
You're gonna know who partners is. That's how we gonna do it.
Hey, yo, the world is ready for you guys, man.
Yeah, we don't have to be big to do big things, you know what I'm saying?
I'm excited for this pizza, for real, for real.
Thank you, Tunde. Wow, I knew you would leave us hungry for more. I know we're gonna have a lot of questions for you. But I think we'll keep moving through the presentations and then we'll all come back together in community and talk about that very powerful video and your words. So let's move forward and hand over the mic to Daniela Peterson, who will talk us through some of her work that she's doing in Chattanooga. Daniela?
Hi, everyone. I'm excited about that pizza too, Tunde. So hi again. Such an honor to share this imaginary table with these amazing people. Wendy, thank you so much for the invitation and for opening and creating spaces for us to share what we do. So I'm going to share my screen. So as I was telling you, my name is Daniela. I'm based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I work with the Trust for Public Land. And today I'm going to be sharing with you one of my favorite, or maybe my favorite project ever. And it's a simply idea. It's a family and friends picture day in one of our parks in Chattanooga and the Eastleigh Park. So I'm going to start sharing. And also I'm going to share a little bit of the Trust for Public Land and myself. And then we're going to go into the project. I also want to credit Brooke Bragger. She's the photographer behind the project and was such a delight to work with her. So the Trust for Public Land, our work is very complex, but our mission is simple, is land for people. And when we work, we believe, or while we work, and I feel very identified, I have the privilege to identify with our work. We believe that democracy happens upside. We believe that people learn to live with each other upside. You meet your neighbor upside. So that's very meaningful for me to work in that line. And we also believe that people need and deserve access to nature, and not just nature, national parks, nature in your neighborhood. And our work shows span cities to wilderness. And we work with communities, and we believe with that our work is transformational. So this is a map. Normally, when you talk about national organizations, you have no idea where we are. And I'm sure that you may be close to one of our projects. Maybe it's your neighborhood playground, maybe it's your favorite national park, maybe it's a trail down the road, or these like wild spaces that we have in the country. We have worked with communities to protect and create new areas for everyone to enjoy in the United States. So that's where we are. So a little bit about me. I'm original from Chile, from the north of Chile. I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and as you can hear, I'm still working my southern accent. It's not going very well, but I'm hopeful that someday I can pass as a southerner. So in Chile, I grew up in the north, and I think that says a lot about me. I'm the daughter of Hector and Mariela, and my grandma was Alicia, a woman that really impacted my life. I really like to honor her. And then all of that, so you have a national organization, you have this immigrant woman, and then you have these pictures, how this happened and what are we doing here? So we work in Chattanooga, in the south side of Chattanooga, and this particular neighborhood, it's mainly represents, it's kind of like the heart of our immigrant community. And our immigrant community here is a Guatemalan community. I started working in the neighborhood 2 years ago. And what you see, they have this amazing park, but you don't see much ownership or pride in the neighborhood. You just observe that. The amount of people that lives there and the amount of people that you see in public space doesn't actually match. So what we did, we started working with the organizations that they have been there for a while, Ella Library, the Neighbor Association, the neighbors that already are out there, and we started collaborating. So this idea is actually started over 2 years ago. And it's a simple idea putting things together. So we saw that the level of ownership, it wasn't high, it was lacking. So how you can increase ownership in a neighborhood and in a community that they can have more appropriation of the space. And one simple thing was like a photography in the space. But this simple idea also is rooted, I don't know if you're familiar with Latin American culture, but if you've been there, in our plazas, in our parks, you have the photographer, and normally you have a donkey or a llama, but you always have the picture at the park. I have those pictures. So we took that cultural component and we put it here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we kind of let's try it out and see what happened. So what happened was that people was drawn to the pictures and they want them to be kind of like immortalized in this public space. So we have a family and friends pictures day, and this is the first phase of the project because it's like it's beautiful itself to see this dimension of diversity, to see bodies in public space. But the second phase also is gonna speak to actually have an exposition, and the exposition is gonna be large pictures at the park where we can see them and they can see us. So I'm here playing double because I identify as a brown and immigrant. So I think it's really important that people can see us in public spaces. And also it's really important that we can see ourselves represented in these open spaces. So that's the second phase of the project. The other phase of the project, and this was like, is in hold because of the pandemic, we actually took the pictures the last weekend that parks were open in our town. So this is kind of like a memory of the old times in March. And the other part of the project, and has to speak with pride, is actually we want to do postcards. So the families are going to be able to share this picture with the people that is not here. As you see, I say people that is not here, thinking in my family, that I can share a little bit of my life here. But this concept applies to everyone, actually, that you want to share the space with someone that you care. So you can share the picture of your park with friends and family. Here's one of my favorite families and friends. And we also ask them what they like the park, what the park is important. So yeah, I'm grateful. These pictures always make me smile. She is Fabiana. After we met her at the park, she was writing, and we are working together now. So the pictures, they can speak by themselves. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm excited to talk more in the questions.
That's beautiful, Daniela. Thank you. I love those photos so much. And I have questions for you too, but let's keep going. I'm going to hand the mic over to Philippa Hughes. Philippa, take it away.
Thank you, Wendy. I want to show a little video too that will maybe make you more hungry. This whole presentation, this whole panel seems to be about making people hungry for more. But I want to give a little bit of context before I show the video. Right after the 2016 election, just about exactly 4 years ago, I was, like many of my other people in my filter bubble here in Washington, D.C., was pretty distraught. Instead of curling up into the fetal position like many of my friends, though, I decided to invite people who had voted for Trump over to my house for dinner. I was just super curious. I had read a lot of books like, Hillbilly Elegy and Gilded Rage and all the things. And I stay up, I watch the news, I read a lot of articles, I try to stay informed. And I thought I understood what had happened or, what could happen, but it was still such a shock to me. And I realized I didn't know anything. And I wanted to ask people questions face to face. I wanted to understand what was happening by asking my own questions and hearing answers that were unfiltered through media, through books, and through other people. And that just was the most amazing experience. 3 people came over to my house. They sat right here at this dinner table here. And I invited a couple liberal friends over too, so I would have some backup. And we just started arguing right from the very beginning. It was amazing, but we still like each other. And I wanted to mention that actually just a couple days ago, I had 2 of the people who were at that original dinner over for drinks here again. We sat outside and we were just laughing and just having a ball talking about wow, what a change, what a change in the last 4 years. So I want to tell you more about that too. But anyway, so I kept organizing these dinners because they were so interesting. And I just kept doing it like every month or two. And I learned a lot from each one. I wasn't trying to do a project. I just was, like I said, I was just really curious, but I did start calling my dinners blueberries and cherries because I would end each dinner with a dessert made of blueberries and cherries, a blueberry and cherry crisp. And, I thought it was very symbolic, because it's red and blue and it would turn into this mushy, gooey purple thing. And, haha, get it, bringing people together. And so like I said, I just kept doing that over and over for a couple of years. And then that turned into a national project through some very generous funding and a partnership with the New American Economy. And so we went around to communities all over the country, organizing art shows and dinners for people from across the political spectrum to have conversations. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about what happened after that, but I thought you could get a little better idea of what that was like from our final destination before COVID hit, which was in Northwest Arkansas, where we did a dinner at Crystal Bridges. So I've got a little video to show you to explain that.
It's more about how we relate to one another as human beings, not necessarily about where we stand on issues. It's there's always going to be disagreement. There's always going to be that's how things are decided. The free exchange of ideas, and if we shut down conversations before we get to those ideas, then we make it very difficult to get anything done.
I've been hearing about all these really amazing conversations happening in really different cities and really different contexts across the country, and I'm looking forward to learning about how people talk about what it means to be American here in Northwest Arkansas. I'm really excited to hear people who come from really different backgrounds communicate with one another.
We're here today in downtown Rogers at Brick and Mortar with an art exhibition called Looking for America, Northwest Arkansas. The Looking for America exhibition of Northwest Arkansas is going to travel across 4 cities in Northwest Arkansas, so that way it's easily accessible to everyone in different communities. And we're hoping that the exhibition sort of spurs and keeps the conversation going that was started at Crystal Bridges.
I'm excited to be here tonight for our Looking for America dinner in Northwest Arkansas. It's a great opportunity to bring people together, to spark conversation using art, to move us forward in discourse. What excites me most about these dinners is I think it's a chance for us to flex our discourse muscle. Something that we need now more than ever is for people to be talking again and not backing away from hard topics, but to be moving forward and leaning into them so that we can all have a voice and move our country forward.
So this project is called Looking for America, and this is a series of dinners and art exhibits across the country in which we're asking people to respond to the question, what does it mean to be American in your community? The reason why we're using art is because art can create a sense of awe and wonder in people. And when people feel a sense of awe and wonder, they feel more curious about each other. And when you feel more curious, you develop more empathy for each other. And that's the whole point, is how do we be more empathetic for one another as human beings? So I decided that I wanted to use art as a way to frame, to spark these conversations. I have worked in the arts for well over a decade here in Washington. And so, I've always been around the art experience. I always understood that art had a way to show different perspectives. It had a way to provoke people. And, it had a lot of very powerful techniques that we could use. But the thing that I was really interested in was like getting beyond the idea of what art is. Like, I love art objects. I came from more of a tradition of contemporary visual art. I love collecting art. I love being around artists. But what I realized is that art needs to be an experience that we share and that we can participate in at some level. So, and I want to tell you that I'm very inspired by an artist named Joseph Beuys. He said that he would create social spaces. He would sculpt social spaces. I kind of stole my name, social sculptor, from him. What he did was he created spaces where people would enter and they would create relationships, form relationships with one another. And the artwork would not be complete until those relationships were formed and until people began to improve society. The improvement of society was important to the completion of the artwork. And so that's where I drew my inspiration. I wanted to create spaces in which people could have dialogue, because I deeply believe that it is through the dialogue, it is through dialogue that humanizes one another and that helps us to understand one another. That's how we're going to bridge our political divides and the other kinds of divides that we have in our country. Until we can do that, we can't even, until we can understand each other, we can't even have conversations about difficult topics like immigration. And so first, we must learn to even just talk to each other again. When I create space, these art spaces, it's about, asking people to enter into a different world, almost like when you go to the theater and the lights turn down, you know that you're in another place, and there are all these sort of signals that tell you that you're in another place. And so I want to signal that you have left the world of polarization and hatred and divisiveness. And now you are in a different place where you can have conversations with each other that are respectful and that are based on understanding and that are meant to build more empathy with each other. And so we begin with art. Now, when I first started organizing these dinners, we began with sort of classic visual art shows, like a show where you walk in like in a gallery experience. And that was very powerful. We had the artists answer the question, what does it mean to be American in your community? And we would get a lot of different perspectives. The artists would be present to answer questions. And so that's how we began. But we started to evolve so that the art experiences became much more expansive in terms of participating in the process of making poetry with a poet, participating in the composition of music with a musician, things like that. And so we began to create community poetry, community poems, community music. It's just evolved and adapted to each place. It's very important to create a sense of ritual. So for example, we always have a whole moment of agreeing to a set of rules that we're going to abide by, agreeing to a way of interacting with each other, so that we can begin that process of understanding. And then, of course, the third element in creating the space is that we want to have people share their personal stories. We hear a lot about storytelling, but I cannot underscore enough how important it is to share personal stories, because one thing that we know through social science is that the more you throw data and facts and figures at a person, the less likely you are to convince them of to persuade them of your position. And in fact, you will back them more into their belief system. And so the only way we can open up the conversation is to share your own story and to talk about your personal experiences and to ask about personal experiences. So those are sort of the three elements of how we create the kind of space that's necessary for creating better dialogue. And I can talk more about, actual dialogue as well in terms of how we lead people along in the dialogue. So when we have invited people into these spaces, I specifically tell them they can't talk about politics until I tell them they can talk about politics. And I ask people to not talk about, what their political stance is or what their political label. I want people to know each other beyond what their political identity is, because I believe that our political identity is about 40th or 50th most important thing about us. There's so much more important things about ourselves. So after we traveled around the country and before COVID hit, before the pandemic, we had to stop traveling and meeting in person to have meals together, which was, a real bummer, because that, was sort of a crux of how we wanted to bring people together over a meal, breaking bread together, because we know that is a fantastic way to connect. We started having Zoom conversations. And so maybe I can tell you more about the Zoom conversations a little bit later, because, it still is a matter of creating the space for having great conversations. All right. I know I've talked enough, and I will tell you more in the Q&A, but I'm really excited, and thank you so much, Wendy, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Philippa. That was awesome. And yes, more questions to come. Let's quickly go to Mohammed Naeem, last but not least, and let's hear about his culture bending campaign, our culture bending campaign at the American Immigration Council.
Hi, everyone. It's a real honor to share this virtual space with my fellow panelists and with you, Wendy. It's been so inspiring to hear what everyone has had to say over the last 30 minutes or so. This project in particular is really personal for me because I am a first-generation immigrant. My family and I, we immigrated originally from Pakistan, but we are so refugees from southern Afghanistan. My own nation has been ravaged by war for anywhere between 40 and 50 years. And it's partly as a consequence of divisive rhetoric and division, both political and social and so forth. And so my work and my career's work is to continue to try to bridge difference in ways that feel meaningful across parties. This campaign in particular, Belonging Begins With Us, has been a labor of love for our team at the Center for Inclusion and Belonging, for Wendy, myself, and our other colleagues, in close partnership with the Ad Council. And the intent and aim of the campaign is to advance a more positive vision for immigration in the United States, but also to strategically aim to reach what we would call exhaustive majority audiences or conflicted audiences. And over the coming slides, I'll share with you a number of our sort of creative assets, including some of the key messages and so forth. So let's move forward here. So part of the campaign objective for the Belonging Begins With Us campaign is to commit and invest in an integrated multi-year communications campaign It's extremely important that campaigns of this kind have sort of a longer view, because attitudes and behaviors are really, really rooted, and they're often extremely hard to shift, especially across such a complicated political landscape like we have here in the United States. Our work is being done with a number of trusted institutional partners, both public and private, across American communities. Some of those include the YMCA of the USA, the Trust for Public Land, the American Alliance in Museums, Welcoming America, and others, with the goal of advancing a more welcoming nation where everyone can belong. We have built the campaign as an ecosystem between two specific infrastructures. One is a national communications campaign, or what we would call the air game. And two is to drive activations locally all across American communities in partnership with some of the organizations that I had just mentioned. We're calling this sort of the ground game. The communications campaign will house the national ads that folks will be able to see on their TV screens and on their phones, out-of-home advertising that I'll share with you in just a little bit, including, and of course, our digital and website, sort of like creative assets and components. Like our local activations are the very same kinds of experiences that Philippa just mentioned, and Tunde mentioned, and Daniela mentioned. Local activations of these kinds, whether they're through the vehicle of art or conversation or dialogue or otherwise, is extremely, extremely important in engaging folks where they are. The strategic audiences of our campaign include what we would call the potential helper audience and the conflicted skeptic audience. These ambivalent audiences represent close to 65% of Americans all across this country. Now, sometimes I often get the question, well, why are you targeting these specific audiences? Why not target audiences on sort of the left 15% or on the right 12%? Well, part of what our research has shown us is that when you center the audience as a protagonist, it creates a space for not only validation, but also real empathetic understanding. And of course, not to mention, ambivalence is not necessarily a bad thing. Ambivalence really sort of creates an opening. It means that someone has not made up their mind on any one political or social issue. And it's important to mention that both the conflicted skeptic audience and the potential helper audience, they are not only ambivalent about immigration, but they're also ambivalent about racial justice. They're ambivalent about climate change. They're more concerned with their own lives. I can get into this with more detail, like during the Q&A. Just like I mentioned, the conflicted skeptic audience, or our target audience for this campaign, is deeply conflicted on the issue of immigration. They often worry about their own personal well-being and the well-being of their families and their communities. This campaign will more or less be their first dose of empathy. And if they connect belonging, this idea of belonging, to people who are different than them, then it's a real important and positive step towards creating a more positive narrative for immigration in the United States. All of the assets, all the creative content, everything that we've built so far at this stage of the campaign, it's intentional. It's relevant to this target audience, and it's intended to meet them where they are. Our creative strategy, what our research has shown us, is that if we can transform this negative universal feeling of not belonging into a positive emotional vehicle that encourages people to open up their emotions, it does create that space to build empathy. It does build space to build empathy for immigrants and other Black and Brown communities. And because everyone knows how it feels to be excluded, they also know how to make others feel like they belong. And in the Q&A, I hope I'm able to share sort of a detail about my own life that has made me feel excluded in so many different spaces. And everyone has that one or two or three things where they feel like they are just different from others. But what we see in that experience is a real opportunity to bridge between yourself and others in your community and in your spaces. And everyone, and we mean this, everyone has the power to welcome others into their community. So what I'm gonna do here is show our ad that will be playing across American screens over the coming year.
If I could be you, and you could be me, for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. If you could see you through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
And not only have we developed like these ads to play on American screens, but we've also developed radio spots to play all across this country and across stations. I will play that for you right now.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
So, like, for those who are asking, the beautiful song that you heard in the background in both the ad spot and the radio spot is from a brand called Lake Street Drive, and we are really excited that they've been part of this journey with us. So the campaign is intended to create multiple touch points for our target audience to be able to interact with. So you saw the ad placement, you saw the radio spot. We will also include out-of-home advertising, this in the form of a billboard. And we hope that as folks are driving down main highways or small routes all across this country, they'll be able to sort of interact with the campaign in ways that are meaningful. This includes a bus stop ad. Again, this is to create really an ecosystem and a sort of the surround sound for this campaign to be successful and for our goals to be met. Here, like the body copy, we've all had moments where we felt we didn't belong. But for people who move to this country, that feeling lasts more than a moment. Together, we can build a better community. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. It's been a real pleasure to be with you all. We're really, really excited to launch this campaign into the world and to really create spaces for deep conversation, but also for empathy and bridge building across the United States and in local American communities.
Thank you, Mohammed. That was great. And I just want to reinforce that, our enduring partner in this campaign has been Welcoming America. And the band is called Lake Street Dive. Not Lake Street Drive, which I used to make that mistake too. I think we're going to bring everybody back into the room. I'm going to just start with one question, and then I want to let you guys ask each other questions because I bet you have questions for each other. You kind of, all of you started to get into this, but I would love for you to give anybody that's watching and is inspired and wants to create their own cultural bending, cultural challenging strategy, what advice would you give them? And add to that a thought about, could you have done this? Like, would you have come up with this idea if you weren't exactly who you are? And how much of who you are is part of the ingredient of making this campaign? And I'd love to start with Tunde.
I was thinking about how I always end up being like the pessimist in spaces, but then I comforted myself by realizing that I'm just in rooms where everybody is idealistic. So I have to bring things down. In terms of starting projects or narrative change or culture bending, I like to think of like the smallest unit of what I think power is or authority is, which is the family. And there are different kinds of families and different kinds of configurations of families, whether it's biological or social, adopted. But I find that families as units that are at least ostensibly interested in creating some sort of peace and unity. Like families are just a really tough place to work in and to find some joy for a lot of people. And so I say this as a way to like set up what I think the magnitude of the problem is that if we are in spaces where, again, ostensibly we are supposed to be in community, that's our family, and those spaces are hard to transform, then bridging the gap across other more difficult barriers like language, like culture, like politics, that's a difficult task. So I don't have any advice beyond what I'm learning as part of a family chosen and the family that I was born into, which is just that I think it takes time. And I think a bunch of the speakers talked about that. Like over time, we're looking at over time is when change happens. And I'm not sure that a particular intervention, no matter how clever or beautiful it is sustainable without time and consistency.
I think that's great advice, because it means we got to be patient, and this work will not solve our problems quickly. So I think that's terrific. Daniela, do you want to weigh in on any advice you would give and how you brought yourself to this work?
Yeah, I think I have 3 points to share, and it has to be with my experience here that I'm kind of like a newcomer. I've been here for almost 6 years, and what I was like, I have a lot of attention that people really wanted to celebrate diversity, and what it means to me is like they want to celebrate me, like because we are a really small pod here in Chattanooga. So was kind of like, why? And also like, I'm more than food, and more than the product of my culture. I'm more, so it's like, it was a lot of stereotype. So, and take us, like extract our humanity and just take the product. So I would say not to start from there. How you can truly understand our culture and not celebrate it all the time. It's actually to just understand, and sometimes you have to just step back. So for me, the pictures, yes, it can be understood as a celebration, but also it's a statement and bring more dimension into what we understand about diversity. So that would be one. The other one that normally how I understand my work is like, how can I explain this to my mom? How, like, and I started asking these questions, like, how do you explain placemaking to my mom that is from totally another culture and understanding, but things should be also simple for people. I know it's because my mom doesn't have like a complex thinking, but sometimes our work gets so in the weeds that we kind of like lost the essence. And I like to use my mom as a reference of like essence and kind of like values. And if I can explain that in 3 minutes, I think it's great. And the other one, like I like your question about, and that's kind of going into families. I think how we can root our work into families, and that bring into my own experience. And I said that it's a privilege that I can think from this perspective, from the work that I do. And I know that that's not the case for everyone, but using that also is in the kind of like the stage of my life that I am. I don't know if like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was going to be doing the same. Also, I became an immigrant at 28, 27 years old. So, and also like an immigrant and not a traveler, because before I was a traveler because I like to travel, but here I became an immigrant, and that itself in my reality here in Chattanooga became also a political statement. So allowed to bring myself into work, it's hard sometimes, because personally for me it's better maybe to hide some part of myself and just be an observer, but also how can I use that? And this project in particular, I think is one of my favorites, and because it's coming from my reality. And I know with that I'm excluding others, but instead of excluding, I'm became to thinking, what are the knots that we intersect? more than just celebrate me here or them and you here, what are the nots that we can share? So we can share pictures with family and share good moments with friends. And that can be, I can send that postcard to my mom, or you can send it to your neighbor or a friend in the same city, and kind of share our spaces and take pride on where we live. So yeah, that's kind of like, I think when we allow ourselves to bring our whole self into our work, our work is more powerful and transformational.
Thank you, Daniela. Philippa, what are your thoughts? What's your advice?
Well, I have, I'm going to pull that thread out a little bit more around family and this idea that my family definitely influences the work in a couple ways. One is that, you know, my mom, I'm the daughter of an immigrant. She is a Vietnamese immigrant, and she is very conservative, and she believes that we should build the wall and keep all the refugees and immigrants out and kick them out, not just keep them out. And, you know, it's very disturbing to me. And so I think in some ways, you know, I almost started organizing these dinners because I was trying to figure out a way to talk to her about it, to understand her. But, you know, she's my mom and she's not a bad person. I knew that for a fact. And so that's why I started to realize the complexity of human thought and how we could not just do these broad brush strokes of what a conservative person is like or what a Trump supporter is like, because my mom is a Trump supporter and I know for a fact that she's not a bad person. And so that was sort of the beginning of my awakening of, let me dig into that a little bit more so that I don't just stereotype people into these simplistic avatars, basically. And so, you know, by the end of this process, not by the end because it continues, but 4 years later, I realized, you know, I understand more than ever that we must understand the complexity of human beings. And then I'll also add too that, you know, why am I the right person it is? I think that, you know, I am a biracial person who grew up in the American South where everything was literally black and white, and that it was like me and my brother, and, you know, growing up with no other people like us in our community, we had to really learn how to live in many different worlds and to not necessarily feel belonging in any of those worlds. And so it's been sort of this lifelong investigation of what does it mean to belong? What does it mean to be American? And that's a very deeply personal experience for me that I realize many people either, maybe sometimes they never think about it, to be honest. They take it for granted what it means to be American. But but it is an experience that once everybody starts thinking about it, it's very relevant to all of us.
Thank you. Wow. Mohammed, you want to follow that?
Yeah, you know, like you had mentioned it early on in your remarks, Wendy, and Philippa just touched on it as well. Our campaign is organized around the core principle of belonging, and belonging means to create sort of shared space for understanding. I mean, that's one of many definitions, but really it's to create an environment where co-creation is the model. And by way of co-creating, that requires or will require hard conversations. It will require to sit in spaces that are deeply uncomfortable sometimes. But it's also a real opportunity to create transformation at a national level. Our campaign is one vehicle by which we hope to do that. And more personally, being a first generation immigrant, you know, I've seen the issue get sort of caught sort of within the poles of division all across this country over the last 4 years, but certainly over the last decade. While most of the rhetoric is negative, there's also, when you sit with Americans all across this country in the ways that we have, there is real space for understanding, and there is real opportunity to be able to engage thoughtfully and strategically. You know, and our campaign is trying to, again, reach those conflicted target audiences because we feel that ambivalence is an opening, and belonging is a track by which we're introducing cognitive dissonance, right? We're creating an entirely different frame by which to understand the experiences of each other. right? So you move that issue away from sort of a divisive political frame and really want folks to sort of navigate the issue of immigration in ways that are meaningful, but also in ways that do not threaten the experiences that folks have had across their lives. And Philippa said it best. Our humanity is deeply complex. Our attitudes and our behaviors are deeply complex. And so it does require a long, strategic, multi-year effort. And just proud to be part of this space and to be able to share in the strategies that everyone's building here.
I want to open it up to you to ask each other questions. I don't want to do all the questions. I have more questions, but I'd love to open it up if you guys have questions for one another.
I have a question. I mean, I find it very difficult to organize these conversations in the sense that it's hard to get it's hard to get people from, let's just say it, the other side, the conservative side. I have to spend a lot of time recruiting them into the conversation. And so I wonder how you all manage that. I mean, if we're going to have real conversations, right, we have to have like actual diverse thought and conflicting thought. But it's often difficult. Like, I feel like liberals are always like gung-ho for these kind of conversations. That's in my anecdotal experience, but it's so hard to get the conservatives.
Tunde, how do you get people to be part of the work that you're doing and come in and question their own privilege and their own position in life? How do you motivate them to want to be in that space with you?
Well, I think two things. I think the first thing is I'm generally, at least for the work I've done so far, is mostly talking to a particular kind of person, which is liberal folks, specifically white liberals. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for critique in that space. I don't talk to conservatives, not by, by design, because my dinners are self-selective, so folks like opt in to the dinners. And just to reiterate, I think that that this is a battle, and I don't believe that you can convince people to change their position through conversation. Like I actually don't think that, and by that I mean I don't think that the time we have is long enough for the change that we need. You know, if we had uncountable time and sort of like the effects of the harm that was being done was negligible, then it'd be fine. But if there's constant harm being done right now, to immigrants, to folks who are from a different country than the United States. And so I look at that as a struggle. And the second thing is, if I am trying to get people who may not necessarily come, I just look for the lowest common denominator, which is I just make the shit sexy. I just make people want to come. So if it's a dinner, then I'm just like focused on how to make the food the sexiest. If it's a conversation, I try and find a way to incentivize folks. And so I think there are different ways to incentivize folks. I think one of the ways to incentivize folks is to challenge them and to say that I don't think you're going to come. And another way is to maybe use like a pricing structure to make it free and open. So I think there are different ways to incentivize people. I think you just need to know what people are, what people's incentives are. And another way, just to keep it real, is just to go where they are, as opposed to expecting them to come to you.
I like that. That's great. And look, I think what's really interesting about there's a variety of projects that you guys are all engaged in. They're different. People have different starting points, right? That's what I've learned. Like there might be someone who could do a deliberative dialogue, but they're probably in a different place, ready to engage and have a difficult conversation, right? Tunde's inviting people into these, interesting, social experiments sort of that they're opting in for, right? And so I get it. And I think a little bit more like what Daniela and Mohammed are talking about is almost like a safer first space for people that aren't ready to have more provocative conversations. All Daniela is doing is inviting people to a park to take pictures, right? And to get to know that space and connect to that space. And the campaign Mohammed is talking about is just a reconsideration, asking people to reconsider. And just to speak to Tunde's point, there is damage being done now, and that is fundamentally a big on the mind of people who work in the immigrant rights movement. And there are tons of defensive strategies that people do, including my organization, where we are getting people lawyers to get them out of detention, filing affirmative litigation against the government for withholding due process. So there is defensive work that must be done. I think the work we're talking about is the longer term culture change strategy, so that hopefully we won't forever be in this situation where we're always playing the defense, right? But that we can have the offensive strategies while we are mounting our defensive strategies. That's one way to think about culture bending work. I think of it as the offensive game of scoring some points and not always being on the defensive side of the sports game. Do folks want to react to that?
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that briefly. You know, what we've had this last summer, we had a real reckoning around racial justice, and you had families who had never spoken to their children about white privilege or Black Lives Matter or other issues begin to have real conversations with their family members. Those were hard conversations, but what often happens in moments like that is that conversations are tended to have, or really folks have that conversation for a short amount of time. Tunde is speaking to a real important point that I think we can't gloss over, is that there's a real rootedness to the behavior and to the attitudes that folks have across issues, including on ours. And I think I often look at it from the perspective of, like, the metaphor is sort of like a highway, right? There are different on-ramps for different kinds of folks, and those on-ramps really symbolize different kinds of strategies. You know, it's so while we're all aiming towards sort of the same vision for what we would like a co-created America to feel like and to look like, there are many means by which we are trying to get there. And so I think all those parallel tracks, the folks on this panel and the folks all across this country that are doing this kind of work, it's attempting to create a society where we do feel like we belong, where there's real co-created space, but where there's also real wrestling with the systemic injustices that this country has placed upon marginalized communities, including Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks. And so it's to not say that any one lane matters more, but it's to say that really this is a reckoning around so much of our experiences coming from marginalized backgrounds. But in order for us to be able to start somewhere, there needs to be on-ramps for audiences all across this country.
Daniela, do you want to comment? Do you want to get in?
Yeah, it made me think, going back to Philippa's, and not trying to wrapping up everyone, but in my case, or like the reality here, is actually sometimes harder to find people like the other to be part of the conversation. We have the spaces, but what happened, and I can talk from my experience, is like, it's hard because you are the subject at the end. Why people from here, they are not in the line, so they can kind of take distance, I think, easily. I don't have that experience, so I think it's easier to take distance for something that you are not. We are the object of the conversation, but at the same part, we are the conversation. So that double movement is just so exhaustive. So sometimes I'm like, I don't want to be here. But if we are not there, who else is gonna talk for us? Because someone's gonna be talking for us, and it's not gonna be yourself. So that is what I found exhaustive. Even if you have all the conditions or to be part of a dialogue, it's just this always is my reality, that the one that we're talking, or the reality of my community, and you can have a lot of opinions on it, but actually you don't live what they're living. So yeah, that kind of made me think in the double movement that as an immigrant or people of color, we are in that. Yeah.
Okay, we are quickly running out of time. Tunde, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I do think that there's, just so I'm not misconstrued, but there's like tremendous value in socializing. And I think it's important. I guess for me personally, this is just how my brain works, is that I have to make a distinction between what I'm doing and how it feels, and it could feel good to talk to somebody who have different views with. In fact, I think we are in fact political animals. We do this often. We engage with folks that we don't agree with completely, but then there's a part tucked away that I recognize what my goal is and what my mission is, and I have to sometimes admit to myself that no matter how friendly or convivial I am with folks, that they don't accept my position, and their lack of acceptance of that position is an existential, threat in a certain way, whether emotionally or physically or whatever. So to the point about parallel tracks, I think there are parallel tracks. I also think that it's important, at least for me, to know that these parallel tracks may not ever converge, and that's okay, and that we can jump from lane to lane, and that's okay. But as long as the folks who are doing a particular kind of work, and in this specific case, engaging or transforming the reality for immigrants here, as long as we know that our goal is to create a place where immigrants feel like they belong, and then all the strategies that we use exist, and we recognize their limitations, then we have to in fact employ all of these strategies, at the same time hold the knowledge that that it is still to a certain degree confrontational reality.
I think that's really important, Tunde, and I think that's the perfect point to end on. As I said at the beginning, this work actually takes courage, and it's not just the people who you're talking to or working with that's uncomfortable. You're living in discomfort when you do this work, and so that's why it's important and it's courageous work. And I'm so happy we got the opportunity to lift it all up, and I'm really excited that the NIC audience will get to hear about the work that you did. So I just want to thank you very, very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to do this and to bring it to our community. I really, really appreciate you all.